In particular, hearing a noise is a very common difficulty in older adults. And it's one that leads to social isolation and depression because, I mean, you can imagine that if it becomes frustrating and increasingly difficult to understand what is going on at your grandbaby's birthday parties, you're just going to stop going there or going out to restaurants, and you're going to miss out on that very important social contact. And so what we have been interested in finding is that musical training seems to offset some age-related declines, not only in speech and noise perception, but also in some of the neural processes that are going on. And this is, you know, ultimately my real interest is to understand the underlying biology. I'm very convinced that musical experience has remarkable fundamental effects on people's ability to hear signals and to enhance their communication skills that are auditory based. But we really, at least to my satisfaction, we are a long way in understanding really how does this work? And if we can understand how it works, then we are in a better position to enhance and to utilize this phenomenon in general learning and educationally overall. So in general, music experience will offset an effective aging, but an effective aging that has been shown pervasively across many nervous system studies is that as we get older, neural timing slows. Neural timing is just something that, whether it's in the auditory system or any system, as we get old, timing just gets slower as we get older. And what we're finding is that in people who have musical training, that some of these timing effects that we can measure with respect to our biological signals actually, they're looking pretty good. And this is not just an overall, you know, with all of our work, we never see an overall gain effect. It is really just specific aspects of sound and the neural encoding of sound that seem to be enhanced with musical experience. And so let me tell you a little bit more about that, because now I really want to focus on what do I mean by the biology and the biological basis. So let me tell you a little bit about our approach. So our approach really is, it's non-invasive and it's objective. So we put actually just a handful of scalp electrodes on people, and we measure the neural response. Very straightforward, of course, as I'm talking to you now. Nerves in your brain that respond to sound give off electricity. We measure that electricity, and we think about it. Where are we recording from? So we're recording, in fact, from, in large part, this inferior colliculus, the midbrain of the brain stem. It is right in the middle of the brain, which is why it's the midbrain. And so, again, we can't really just be thinking about this low level of processing, because this is part of a very large interactive system that involves many different areas in our brain. And the inferior colliculus is really a site of inordinate convergence. So both from pathways coming upstairs and pathways coming down. The inferior colliculus, we know neuroanatomically, this is an area that is very, very, very rich in input pathways from the cochlea and in downstream pathways from the limbic system, from our cognitive system, and from other aspects of our auditory system. We also know in animal studies, in very controlled animal studies that have been able to look at the role of the inferior colliculus, that it is extremely important in auditory learning. So for this reason, the fact that it really is an area of the nervous system that is experience dependent, that's one of the reasons that I think it's very useful to look at and to study. So that's one aspect. The other is that the response that we can extract from the nervous system actually physically resembles the stimulus in temporal and in spectral structure. So it is these changes in time and in spectra that are very important for all of our communication, whether it's musical signals or speech signals. So let me just show you. Here is a speech sound, and here is the neural response. And you can see that the timing in the speech sound is preserved in the neural response. There's really a transparency there. So you are really able to see what components in the timing, for example, in the signal are maintained with what kind of fidelity in the response. Also, if you look at the spectral shape, again, the stimulus and the response resemble each other. You can do a fast Fourier transform on any signal, be it an acoustic or a biological one. And here is a speech sound. This is da, and this is the brain wave. And if the responses really do resemble the stimulus, then you ought to be able to take the electrical response that you measure, play it back through a speaker, and it should sound kind of like the evoking stimulus. So here is the stimulus,
Da.
and here's the brain's response.
Da.
Okay, the first part of this is going to be Deep Purple, and then it will be the brainstem. Okay. So this one, we just did this last week, this last one. So there you go. If you want to hear these again, because I think they really are cool, just visit our magical website on the homepage. There's a demonstration, and you can play them back. Anyway, so I feel like we really have a lot to work with, and, because I've recorded single neuron responses, I've recorded cortical responses, I still do. But you don't have, what you're getting in these single neuron responses is an abstract representation of the signal. Whereas here, in these aggregate neural responses, you really have a greater transparency between the actual stimulus and how the brain is representing the elements in it. So these spectrotemporal, in spectrum and in time, these changes in speech, the onsets and offsets of syllables, timing, the formats. These are keys to communication. These are very important elements that, again, are important for real life functions like hearing and noise and reading. And what we've seen in a number of our studies is that we really do see this coincidence between the timing and timbre representation in the brainstem and people's real life communication skills. And importantly, another line of work is showing that musical training is enhancing, in particular, those skills. So it's, again, this is not an overall volume effect. It is these particular aspects of timing and of spectral dynamics that are important for communication. These are the elements that coincide with communication abilities and that are enhanced with musical training. So ways of measuring timing, just so you can get a sense, you can measure these responses, you can do a spectral analysis, look at the fundamental frequency and the representation of the harmonics. You can look at the representation of pitch over time. So how then have we used this approach now for understanding hearing and noise? The neural fidelity, so the extent to which the nervous system is able to do a good job transcribing sound is actually related to this very complex skill of hearing speech and noise. And so remember I said that the response resembles the stimulus to such an extent that a stimulus to response correlation is a meaningful metric. So what we see is that the better your speech and noise perception, the better your nervous system correlates these two signals, the better the signal to response, the stimulus to response correlation. And importantly, if you now look in musicians, so in quiet, there isn't really that much of a difference between the musicians and the non-musicians with respect to their stimulus to response correlations. But if you look in noise, the musicians still are pretty good. They still maintain a pretty similar to quiet stimulus to response correlation, whereas the noise really affects the non-musicians. We see this in young musicians, young adults, and in school-age kids, where the kids are even more affected by the background noise in terms of the stimulus to response correlations. Neural timing delay. We know that anytime you present a stimulus in noise, it creates a delay in neural timing. And we hypothesized that this delay in timing would be worse if you were poor at hearing speech and noise, and that the noise would have less of an effect on the timing if you were good at it. And this is exactly what we've been able to find. So if you're good at hearing speech and noise, you have less of a timing delay than if you are poor at these standardized measures of speech and noise perception. And importantly, these measures correlate very nicely. So the better your speech and noise perception, the less of a timing shift you have. So you really have very objective ways of being able to measure how good is the nervous system in representing elements of sound, how does noise disrupt this representation. And again, we see the musician advantage, where in quiet they're responding pretty similarly. The musicians are showing a little bit of a timing shift in noise, but the timing shift is much greater in the non-musicians. It's very important for the nervous system to be able to disambiguate, to be able to differentiate speech sounds. And in particular, stop consonants have been the holy trinity of research. There's been a tremendous amount of research looking at the perception of stop consonants, and especially in people who have impairments of various kinds, reading impairments or hearing and noise impairments, because these elements of speech are very perceptually vulnerable. And so it turns out that the nervous system, you know, our wonderful nervous system, our wonderful auditory system, is very good at disambiguating differences in formants here, differences in frequency in the neural code on the basis of time. And so these are timing differences, again, on the order of fractions of milliseconds that are very, very significant and meaningful to work with. So we can now look at how good is the nervous system at disambiguating elements that are important, we know, for speech perception. Now, one way, we can see also that the extent of timing differentiation, so the better the nervous system is at differentiating these speech sounds in terms of timing, the better people's speech and noise performances, okay? So these measures are really relating to